Wycombe Wanderers, they're used to being massive underdogs at this level, not just in the Gareth Ainsworth era, but also if you go back to the Martin O'Neill era, where they so nearly got to the playoffs in 1995, but with a recent history of being a non-league club. But this time around, after incredibly winning promotion with one of the lowest budgets in the division and everything against them in 2020, this time around they're actually not quite one of the wealthiest. Not quite one of the favourites for the division, but they are backed by Kazakhstan billionaire now after a takeover overseen by the Couhigs. How's that going to work out, and how do Wycombe embrace being a bit more of a fancied side this season, having a few more quid to play with? How can a club that's not used to those sorts of advantages get to grips with those sorts of advantages, and will they do it sensibly under the new chairman Dan Rice and also Matt Bloomfield? A respectable first season in charge, but not without a significant drop in form in the middle. Can he start to implement even more of his ideas of what a Matt Bloomfield Wycombe Wanderers side should look like? A lot to get into, and not to mention whether they can finish in the top six this season. All those things and more we're going to be discussing on this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to the latest EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive, one of 72 we're doing across the EFL, club by club, between mid-June and mid-July. Already the full set uploaded for League Two to YouTube and to Spotify, so go and check those out once you're done with this one. For now, delighted to be joined, sporting an England top as well, by James Richings from the Bucks Free Press, the dedicated Wycombe Wanderers journalist. James, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making the time to join me. Just talk to me about where Wycombe Wanderers are as a club right now.
Oh, well, where do you even start, Gav? Where do you even start? I mean, your intro pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything. It's been a quiet summer. It's been a quiet summer. No, honestly, it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting. The Couhigs last summer announced they were going to be selling the club, and we all knew it was going to happen, but we just didn't know when. So when they made the announcement in the bank holiday weekend in May, the first bank holiday weekend, it sort of, well, especially to everyone outside, it sort of came as a bit of a shock because it just seemed to have been announced without any sort of pre-warning. But the reaction has been pretty much nearly all positive. Many, many people have thanked the Couhigs. They will always hold the Couhigs in high regard for what they did for Wycombe across those 5 seasons. During a pandemic as well, where finances were very much stretched. But Rob has said, my time is now done. I want to move on to new things, and he's sent it over to the new people. I'll tell you what, there is a lot of excitement around the place. It really, really is. There's talk about what we already know about the new training ground, which is Harlington, which used to be Chelsea's old training ground before they moved to Cobham. There are talks about reintroducing the academy. The academy, of course, closed in 2012 when Wycombe were but they were in dire straits at the time. Yeah. They really, really were. So there's a lot of excitement about that being reintroduced. The caliber of player that's going to be arriving at Adams Park. Matt Bloomfield last season said the way he wants Wycombe to play in this more progressive manner, he wants Premier League players. So we're going to see a few signings come through, which are going to be loans from Premier League sides. So it's really, really exciting times at Wycombe. But as Dan Rice said recently, he said they've got very high goals. They're not going to happen overnight. There's some of them are going to take years, but the ultimate goal is to get Wycombe Wanderers in the Premier League. It may take, I know it's a huge, huge goal to set. But if you put everything in place and you follow your plan, there's nothing to suggest Wycombe can't do it. We've seen clubs similar in Wycombe size reach the Premier League, the most notable one being Bournemouth. And I think people forget back in 2008-9, they were literally on their knees, about to fall into the Football League. Yeah. With Wycombe back in 2014, 10 years ago. So who's to say Wycombe can't dream big? So it's very, very exciting times at Wycombe at the moment, but it's all very important to be level-headed and just make sure we don't run before we can walk.
Yeah, I think that's important because run before you can walk, or even be able to drive out of the Adams Park with more than one exit. 'Cause I think if you're going to get into the Premier League, you're probably going to need to sort out some of those logistics.
Well,
But luckily, that's a bit more long term, I suppose. Um, yeah, I think the training ground you mentioned there, James, that's a really exciting thing in terms of the facilities of the club as well, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. I mean, Marlow Road is okay. I've been there many times, and it's a very tidy and very remote area for Wycombe to use. And it's not the greatest, but it's not the worst. And obviously, there were some renovations that were made to the facilities a year or so ago. But moving into Harlington, which were used by Chelsea. And this was when Chelsea had not long, I think this was back around 20 years ago or so. So give or take at the start of the Abramovich era, this was used by a Premier League side that were regularly getting, this was before Chelsea were, the powerhouse that they are. But this was
No,
Chelsea
but
side.
they still had Zola at that time, and they
Yeah,
were
they
still
did.
sort of challenging for Europe and all that kind of thing. So,
So,
yeah.
and the fact that Wycombe are going to be going into that is a huge statement of intent. So, no, it's all about progression, and it's all about changing things to get to where you want to be, and moving away from Marlow Road into Harlington is a huge boost for Wycombe. It really is.
Yeah, certainly is. So I think I wanted to mention the Couhigs actually just briefly, because whether or not they always necessarily got the credit they deserved as Wycombe Wanderers owners probably isn't for me to say, because I'm not in the middle of it, if you like. But I do think they've been fantastic custodians for Wycombe Wanderers, and I don't think that this Kazakhstan takeover would have been possible, if from just the Wycombe Wanderers supporters trust, with all love and respect, love in the world to them. They needed someone in the middle, and the Couhigs have been absolutely fantastic from that point of view. So I think the club owes them a debt of gratitude, that's for sure. I think what's really interesting is that you've already the academy's opening, which is great, but you've also opened up a couple of years ago a B team, and it looks like again you've got a few players that could come into the squad off the back of what they've done with the B team, and possibly some local stints out on loan.
Oh, very much so. I mean, the B team was pretty much the replacement for the academy several years after the academy closed, and it's been very successful for Wycombe. And most notably, you look at the players that have come through that academy. You've got Chris Farino, who obviously left a couple of weeks ago to go to Bolton. We all knew that was going to happen at some point. You got Ali Al Hamadi, who's now, well, if he plays for Ipswich, he'll be a Premier League player. So that's incredible to think. And the most notable one, in my opinion, anyway, is of course Anis Mehmeti, because the 6 months he had at the start of the 22-23 season were just incredible. Hence why he got scouted by Bristol City and moved on. Obviously, there have been a few players that have graduated but haven't hit the same heights as them. They've gone on to forge very successful careers in the lower pyramids, in the lower regions of the football pyramid, and that's something that can't be knocked. So I reckon it will be a good balance. You're going to have the development team, and that's going to literally help with their development, but we're going to have an academy whenever that gets introduced to really help children really gain the necessary experience that they need to go through the ranks. And then hopefully the development side will then be a case of, right, okay, you've done the academy, you go into development team where you'll be playing with people your own age, and that's where you'll be like, right, okay, you're now very close to getting into the first team. And as I mentioned with the 3 players I've just said there, it is doable. It really is doable. And I think it's important to note there have been a few members of the old Wycombe Academy, who have gone on to have very good careers. The most notable one being Matty Cash. So it is very exciting for Wycombe, and I think we're going to see a lot of Georgian and Kazakhstani players come to Wycombe in the next few years, because Mikheil Lomtadze, he wants a really good relationship between the 3 countries, England, Georgia, which is where he's from, and Kazakhstan, which is where he lives. So I reckon we're going to see a few potential international players come through, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that you could be onto something there. In terms of signings, then it's a difficult one to possibly sort of work out how many you're going to need, because I imagine that pre-season might shape how many of those sort of fringe B team players give themselves a chance of coming into the first team squad, and how many might stay in the B team or go out on loan. If you had to sort of put a guess or a ballpark figure on it, how many more additions do you think you're going to need?
Oh, how long's a piece of string, mate? Honestly, it's too hard to call. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw double digits, to be honest with you. That's just my opinion. Because I know last season was very, very similar. Last season, well, a year ago, it was Matt Bloomfield's first transfer window. And after the first signing, which was Richard Keogh, was announced on the 1st of July, we just saw signing after signing after signing. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was around, I would say, 15, 16 new faces. Obviously, some for the development side, some were for the first team. And by January, many of those players had left because Bloomfield realised they didn't fit the system that he wanted. There are several positions that Wycombe need to improve on going into the new season. And I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happens. So we were to see maybe 10, 11, 12 new players come through this summer. And then by January, maybe 4 or 5 depart. Maybe, they return back to their parent club on loan or contracts get cancelled. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that were to happen. But some of the positions that Wycombe need a goalkeeper. Max Drake has left. He's returned back to Poland. Nathan Shepherd, who was signed on a very short-term deal after Strejk left the team in February, March time, he's left, which means the only goalkeeper Wycombe have at the moment is Franco Ravazzoli.
You've got Lawrence Sharla, who you signed as well.
Oh, yes, Shalala. So Shalala, he joined last season. He was very much for the development team.
Okay.
But he hasn't played a first team game for Wycombe yet. And I think he went on loan. I think it was to Banbury last season, and then his loan spell got ended due to injury. So thank you for correcting me on that. So Shalal at the moment is the only contracted keeper at Wycombe, because Ravazzoli, he only signed a 1-year deal, and that deal technically comes to an end in a few days. He's been offered a new deal, but we don't know if he's signed that or not. Maybe the club, though, I personally don't know if he has agreed to extend his contract or not.
I feel like the fact there's no news would suggest that he could be on his way. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Who knows? But I think we can agree that probably a goalkeeper is going to be needed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
And I think a right back as well. Not to say Jack Grimmer hasn't done well, because Jack Grimmer last season was one of Wycombe's best players. He was absolutely fantastic. And we've got Jason McCarthy as well. He's going to be there for the season, but he had some really unfortunate injuries last season. I think he might have only played 10, 11 games last season, Jason McCarthy. We've got Jasper Pattenden, who had a really good spell around the autumn period into Christmas, but then he suffered an injury and couldn't really get back in. And Kane Vincent-Young as well. He was released after one season, but he's staying at Wycombe to recuperate.
So he's not under contract, but he is staying around the place to recuperate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I don't know if this could be another Darius Charles situation where Charles was released, stayed, recuperated, and then got another deal. I don't know if that could be the case. I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen. Yeah. But I think we can just need numbers at the back. I know we've signed Alex Hatteridge from Exeter, which I believe will be a very, very shrewd signing. He was imperious on the opening day last season when Wycombe played Exeter. I mean, Wycombe were 2-0 down inside 4 minutes, and Hatteridge had a very good game. So I reckon that might have been in Bloomfield's mind as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Alex Hartridge is he can play left of a back 3 or left back in a 4, which makes me ask the question, James, about formation, because there was early in the season, I think there were times where he did play with a back 3, but I get the impression that Wycombe fans feel back 4 is the better bet for Wanderers.
Yes, I believe so. There were times during the season where Wycombe would have a back 5 or a back 3, and it just didn't work. Okay. Most notably during the period where Wycombe, I think, went 12 games without a win in the league. It was predominantly either a 3 or 5, and you can just see the shape just wouldn't work amongst the whole squad. So when Freddie Potts came back into the team. There was a bit more of a balance in the midfield. Wycombe went back to a 4 at the back with either Grimmer or McCarthy starting at right back. Luke Leahy usually would be in the would be in the centre of the park, but he would also drift back to left back, and you can just see it just worked. There was a nice balance. So personally, going forward, I would stick with a back 4, but I don't have any coaching badges, so I don't know. But just looking at it, it just seemed the back 4 would work rather than a back 3 or a back 5.
Okay. I suppose what interests me though is Luke Leahy played more often at left back last season than he did at in central midfield, although he can also play left centre back in a 3. But you've signed Alex Hartridge, who again I think is another player that's probably more likely to play left back in a back 4 than left centre back in a back 4. So are we looking at competition between Luke Leahy and Alex Hartridge for next season, do you think?
Potentially, but then I wouldn't be surprised if that were to be the case. But then with Freddie Potts now returning to West Ham, you've got Josh Scowen in the centre of the midfield. Who's he going to be partnered up alongside with? So you could have potentially Luke Leahy drifting into the centre like he did for periods of last season. But when Luke Leahy was at left back, he was brilliant. The crosses he would deliver were just pinpoint. It's no surprise he was on set pieces for the vast majority of last season. So I wouldn't be surprised if we did see that. If we did see the competition between Hartridge and Leahy. But Bloomfield has said on numerous occasions that he wants players who can play in more than one position in the absence of someone who would usually play there. So you look at someone like Brandon Hanlon, who should hopefully be returning in around a month's time following his ACL. Hanlon can play up top on his own. He could play in 2 up top, or he can play on the wing. So if anything were to happen, let's say Sam Vokes is on fire and we need a winger, but one of our wings is injured, you could put Hanlon on there. Or maybe Vokes is having a bit of a dry spell, you could play with the 2. So he wants players who can play in multiple positions so they can fill in for other people. And I think that's the way Wycombe want to go moving forward, rather than just have one person who is good in one position but no good anywhere else.
You mentioned Sam Vokes there, James. Do you still think that he's going to have an important role in the first team, or do you think he's going to become a bit more of a plan B next season?
It's a hard one. It really is. I personally believe he might be more of a bit part player next season, but you can't deny his quality and his attributes. You really, really can't. One thing I will give Sam Vokes is that last season, he was incredibly unfortunate with the amount of fouls that never went his way. I kid you not, Gab. The amount of times his shirt was over his head when a corner came in, or he had to change his shirt because it was ripped, and the referees and linesmen just wouldn't give a free kick or a penalty for anything, even though he's clearly being manhandled. Very much went against him. He's in his mid-30s now, so obviously he's no spring chicken, but he's an absolute unit of a guy. Like, you cannot, like, if you're going up in the air with him, you're going to lose. You really, really are. He's a clinical finisher. Some of his goals last season all came within the 6-yard box, so he knows how to finish. But I reckon he could be a bit of a bit part player next season, especially if Brandon Hanlon is back fit, because Bloomfield did say last season that a lot of his plans did revolve around Hanlon. And obviously we had the Wrexham rumours last summer where he was very close to going but didn't, and that's why he missed the Sutton game in the League Cup. We asked him, why was he omitted? Was he injured? And he said, well, there's been a lot of noise, hence why he's not been included. And then when he had his ACL injury, Bloomfield even said he had such a huge role to play. And in the time before his injury, he only scored a handful of goals, but you can see his build-up play. You can see the way he was linking up with everyone around him. He was so important. So if Hanlon does become fit again for the time for the season, I wouldn't be surprised if he were to be starting and Vokes would be on the bench.
My slight concern with the striker position, if we're holding Wycombe to top 6 standards, which in a way is a compliment to you because of how far you've come, but if we were to hold you to those standards, my concern would be Vokes, I think he's a little bit past his best. Still has some qualities, but not quite at the level he was maybe in the 21-22 season. You got Brandon Hanlon, who you said had a really good patch of form, and Matt Bloomfield thinks a lot of him. But I still think there is a question mark with Brandon Hanlon in terms of consistency. We know that he can be a threat running at people, but in terms of end product, in terms of consistency, personally, I would have a question mark about him as a starting top 6 centre forward. You got Richard Kone, who I think is very talented, but he's still very young. So is Jaden Bartolo. So for me, you've got 3 sort of first team strikers there. And I don't know that any of them will quite get you to the level that you need if we're saying Wycombe are aiming for the top 6.
I think that's one of the positions as well that Bloomfield will be looking at, because obviously last season we had Dale Taylor as well on loan from Nottingham Forest. And whilst Taylor didn't hit the numbers that he was hoping for, you can't knock his work rate and his build-up. He was one of those strikers that fans would get very frustrated at. But when you look back, you think, oh, yeah, he did this, he played a role in the goal being scored, even though he didn't score it. And I think Wycombe will probably look at another striker similar to him, but obviously have a few more goals to his arsenal. And I think when you look at it, last season, I said this a year ago, last season was always going to be an experimental year for Wycombe. We didn't know what to expect going forward. We saw wholesale changes in the summer with players coming and going, and it was a really, really inconsistent start. I mean, when there's a lot of excitement to the start of the season and you're 2-0 down at home within the first 3.5 minutes, you're thinking, oh my God, like this going, what's going on? But then Wycombe managed to improve. They got a system going. They had the players that they wanted to play in a certain system. And Wycombe, I think, finished 9th or 10th. I can't even remember.
I think 10th,
yeah. 10th, which is still one of the highest finishes ever in Wycombe's season. And on top of that, you've got a Wembley final, which obviously I know we lost, but still a day out of Wembley can never be sniffed at. And then you look at it from another angle. Wycombe went 12 league games consecutively without a win, and they still managed to finish in the top 10 of League One. Yeah. So there is a lot of progression made by Wycombe, and I think the time, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be perfect, but these are very exciting times for Wycombe.
Yeah, and I think during that 12-game winning streak, there are a few games there where home games against Shrewsbury, against Cambridge, I think there was one other where it was like you had the chances to win and didn't quite put them away. So I think if you can find that ruthless streak, then hopefully you can avoid those sorts of in-season slumps. But I wanted to come to central midfield because you mentioned Luke Leahy might come into it as an option with Alex Hartridge coming in at left back. But you've also got Josh Scowen there, who I've always found to be such a reliable midfield. Anytime you see Josh Scowen on a League One squad, you always go tick because he's so tenacious. You know what you're going to get from him. But you've got Matt Butcher there as well, who's also won promotion before with Plymouth Argyle.
Oh, very much so. And I think Butcher arriving was such a shrewd signing by Bloomfield. He's come in and he doesn't look a foot out of place, honestly. He really, really doesn't. He's so calm on the ball. He's got very, very good technical ability. He can see a pass. Very, very good finisher. He doesn't thrash at it or anything. He usually just glides it. And he's been a very, very shrewd signing for Wycombe. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see, Scowen will always be the starter. That goes without saying. Scowen, in my opinion, is like League One's N'Golo Kante. He is literally everywhere. And if you see Josh Scowen chasing you, he's going to be chasing you for the entirety of the game, honestly. He'll
be chasing me for the entirety of the day, let alone the game.
Honestly, he's like that Duracell bunny, honestly, just never runs out of energy. So he'll be the one that will be starting all the time. But then who do you put alongside with him? Luke Leahy, naturally a left back. But then again, things change. It's going to depend on the opposition. It really, really is. Bloomfield is so meticulous in his planning that he won't necessarily keep the same team. He will look sometimes at, this player I reckon can match with that player, so I'm going to change things about. It all depends on the game to game, and it all depends on who the opponents are, because there could be a time where Scowen has played, 15 games in a row. He's like, right, okay, we're getting to the Christmas period now. You're going to have a break, and you're going to have Butcher and Leahy in the centre of the park, and then you can have Hartridge go at left back, and then it could be as right as rain. So in the centre of the park, Scowen will always 9 times out of 10 start, and I wouldn't be surprised if Butcher were to start alongside him, because he's really not looked out of place at all since arriving at Wycombe. He's been very, very good.
Yeah, plenty of legs in that midfield. I think that's going to give you a great platform, whichever two from those three that you go with. But the one area that I'm curious about is the attacking midfield positions. So if we're saying 4-2-3-1, which probably looks the likeliest, you've got Wheeler, Pattenden, and Labala, who I think can play on the right. You've got Christy Ward, who can play in the number 10 position, but he's only just came in from the B team, and you've got Kieran Sadlier from the left. But again, a bit like I'm talking about with the striker position, do you need a bit more top high-end quality to come into those attacking midfield spots if you're going to really try and challenge this season?
I think you might need to add maybe 1 or 2, but have a bit more competition in there to see what we can do. And then obviously, you got high-end players, but you look at someone like Gareth McCleary, who's just signed a new...
McCleary signed.
Yes, so McCleary has he teased everyone. He put an announcement up indicating he was going to be leaving. Right. Fooled me, because I then put a post out saying, thank you for everything, and then he announces no, it's all a ruse, and he announced that he was staying for an extra year. And McCleary, I believe it was after the Bristol Rovers game last August, he said he has no intentions of stopping, and he said he's doing more in the gym. He doesn't look...
Well, doing even more in the gym. He's already got like a bit of a six-pack going on, and very...
Honestly, he's not shy.
He takes care of himself, doesn't he?
Oh, he does. I mean, he's 37 years old, but he plays like in his late 20s, honestly. Yeah. Like, he's obviously, you're going to lose that yard of pace the older you get, but he doesn't look it at all. He's very, very much still part of the team, and he will be a huge asset for Wycombe next season. And we saw it last season as well. He can still beat a man. He can still whip in the cross. He's still got that technical ability. And I think one of the shrewdest signings as well, as I mentioned, Matt Butcher, was Kieran Sadlier. When Kieran Sadlier signed, I initially thought, okay, he'll probably be a bit part player, a few appearances here and there. But he was a regular starter, especially after like the autumn period. And I remember a game, it was against Leyton Orient. We drew 0-0. And it was an all right game. It was average, but Sadlier just stood out from the rest. And the way he can whip a ball into the back post is fantastic. So all you just need is consistency. And we saw that at the back end of last season. I think Wycombe I think I can only recall one defeat that Wycombe had at the back end of last season. If we talk like between like the end of March to the end of April when the season ended, I think that was to Portsmouth at home, and Portsmouth won the league, and they clearly won the league. They were the best team in the league, and losing at home to them is there's no shame in that. So Sadlier on his day can really, really be a top high-end League One player. Gareth McCleary's played in the Premier League. He played in the Championship for many years. He's a Jamaican international. He's played at some international tournaments, so he has got a lot of caliber, a lot of quality that Wycombe fans have seen. So I think you can't knock having maybe 1 or 2 extra bodies to add as competition. But then at the same time, you could also look at the development side. You've got someone like Christy Ward, who, in my opinion, will get a few games next season. That's if he doesn't go out on loan, because he is a very, very promising talent. He really, really is. Okay. I know we're talking about the attacking sense of it, but you've got someone like Declan Screwer, who joined, I think it was back in 2023, I think it was. He was on loan last season at Ebbsfleet. I watched him the odd time, and he looks like he is a good footballer. Just all round. I know it's easy to say, well, that's National League, completely different. It's completely different to the Football League. But
where does Skira play?
So I believe he can play left back, but he could also play in the defensive midfield. Okay. When I saw him at Ebbsfleet, he was more as a left back. And I remember I watched him against Maidenhead. Obviously, Maidenhead not too far away from Wycombe, and he was everywhere, and quite quiet, but he was getting involved. He wouldn't shy away from a tackle. He was constantly taking throw-ins. Every time the ball was there to be won, he would go for it. And that's the sort of player Wycombe needs. They need those sorts of players. And I know people always say, oh, Wycombe are this very unattractive side. Wycombe aren't the old side that they used to be. The Wycombe are very much a progressive team. Matt Bloomfield is very much about the data, the science. Okay, well, how much data space do we leave in this game? Well, we can't do that for this one. Before we do our interviews, he is analysing the game as it's finished. He is that meticulous with what he wants to do. So Wycombe, I reckon, could be a bit of a dark horse next season in League One. You look at the teams. I know you're a Brummie, and I know they are one of the favourites for next season. And I know Wrexham will be there, Rotherham will be there, Huddersfield, but Wycombe, I personally believe, will be in the top 8. Where in the top 8, we don't know, but that's my prediction. If it comes back to bite me, then that's part of the parcel of what we do. But there are a lot of moving parts at Adams Park at the moment, and Wycombe are very much growing in what they can do.
I know we're pushed for time, James, because I know you've got other commitments, but I wanted to touch briefly on the centre-back positions because you got Ryan Tafazolli, who I think has been very reliable for Wycombe Wanderers, a bit like Jack Rimmer over the last, 3 years now, I think it is, 4 years. But Joe Lowe was fantastic on loan from Bristol City as well. I mean, to have them simultaneously, by the way, they're both 6'5", are they? Or something like that. So to have them simultaneously, that would be absolute monsters. It'd be like, Godzilla's invading Adams Park.
Honestly, when you got to interview them both at the same time, you just got neck ache. Honestly, yeah. But no, honestly, Joe Lowe last season was a real revelation. He was our top goal scorer for the first few games as a centre back. I think he scored 3 and 4.
They should call him Joe High.
Joe, yeah. You know what? I'll mention that next time when I see him, actually. But yeah, the centre-back partnership, at the moment, it's Tafazolli and Lowe because Farino has since departed. And last season, we saw Longvik and Farino have a really, really good partnership. And what surprised a lot of people as well was when we played Peterborough in the EFL Trophy final, the partnership at the back was Farino and Longvik. And that was the first time they had started ever, and they were absolutely imperious. So centre-back partnership will obviously be one for Bloomfield to look at. I hope they can get back Longvik. I really, really do. He did have a bit of a slow start at Wycombe. He got hauled off after about 25, 30 minutes against Stevenage. And he and Bloomfield even admitted it wasn't the right game for him because when you're playing a Steve Evans side, you can't have those technical centre-backs who can play with their feet. You need like a no-nonsense defender who will just sort of go in and, Longvik isn't like that. He's very strong. He can do what he needs to do, but he's very technical. He's like a Rio Ferdinand, in my opinion. But you needed like an Nemanja Vidic for that sort of game. So when he got hauled off after half an hour, I did feel for him because I thought it wasn't the right game for him. And even Bloomfield said the same thing. But as time went on, we saw what Longvik could do. His goal against Reading, the scissor kick, which won the club's goal of the season, for a centre-back is very impressive. And I think it was Port Vale away, one of the final away games of the season. Longvik scored, and he made a long bursting run through the centre of midfield, and he slotted it in past the keeper for a centre-back.
So, do you know what, though, James? I think you can find a nice balance there where you have one of Tafazolli or Joe Lowe alongside a Longvik who can bring the ball-playing aspect, and they could complement each other quite nicely.
Oh, and that's what I'm pretty sure that's what Bloomfield wants. He wants players to show each other's strengths and not really show each other's weaknesses. So if you've got a centre-back partnership and one is that getting your shorts dirty sort of defender, but the other one is more technical, he will want that nice balance at the back. But at the moment, Grimmer can play at right centre back, and he's been doing that quite frequently. So I wouldn't be surprised if he were to be like that next season. Joe Lowe and Taff, your standout centre backs. Farino's now gone, Longvik's gone. That will be a position, I wouldn't say of concern, but that is a position that Wanderers are very much looking at.
Tell you what, an idea I quite like is actually Jack Rimmer, Joe Lowe and Alex Hartridge as a back three. I think that could work quite nicely because I do like Jack Rimmer as this probably isn't a popular view with Chairboys fans because I know a lot of you like a back four, but for me, I think Jack Rimmer could do it as a right centre back in a 3 because he's very good in 1v1 situations, and I think that back 3 would allow you to get another body higher up the pitch. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, but we'll have to see what Matt goes with. We'll make these last few questions quick fire, James, because I know you're a little bit pushed for time. Expectations for next season. You've said top 8 is the aim, or you think you'll be in the top 8. So presumably you think the expectation is, top 10 minimum. Really, you want to make sure that you make some sort of progress from last season.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's all about progression. It really, really is. And if Wycombe regress, then I'll be like, oh, what did we do wrong this season? I mean, you look at the last few seasons. When they got to the playoff final in 2022, they finished 6th. 22-23, when Gareth Ainsworth left and Bloomfield came in, they finished 9th. And then last season, the season that's just finished, they finished 10th. So yes, they've gone down by 1 place. But you need to remember as well, Bloomfield's first full season, not just at Wycombe, but as a manager as a whole. It was also, Wycombe also had one of the worst spells in Football League history. I think it was the joint longest they ever went without winning a game since joining the EFL back in the early 90s. And then on top of that, you've got a Wembley Cup final as well. So it was a real roller coaster for Wycombe last season. And I know a lot of Chairboys fans, so the ones who I've spoken to, have said Wycombe are very much a League Two side in League One. Well, for a side that has finished in the top half of League One for the past 3 seasons, surely now the narrative will have to change, because this isn't just luck. You don't just finish in the top half of League One on luck. You do it on merit, and Wycombe are on something good. So my personal opinion is that Wycombe next season will be aiming for the playoffs. That is a guarantee. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be easy, and it's not guaranteed at all. But that is obviously the ultimate aim, getting into the top 6. But in my opinion, if Wycombe get into the top 10, that will be a good stat. That's a very, very good season for Wycombe. But top 8, bare minimum, top 6 is the goal.
Well, we'll see. What are the reasons to believe, just to condense everything we've talked about in this podcast, big reasons to believe that you'll achieve your ambitions and finish in the top 6?
I think it's all to do with this might sound a bit stupid, but I think the fact that Bloomfield was able to have the whole season to really implement his ideas was a huge, huge thing for Wycombe to do, because we have seen many, many clubs pull the trigger on a manager after several hairy results. Sure. And the fact that Wycombe stuck by Bloomfield, who'd only joined as manager a few months previously, 12 games without a win in the league. Wycombe were 8th, I think, at the time of the run. They then went down to about 17th, 18th. There were genuine fears. I can tell you this right now. There were genuine fears that Wycombe were going to be taken into a relegation fight, but the Couhig stuck by Wycombe. They stuck by Bloomfield. They gave them the time, and you saw Wycombe eventually go up the table. You could see what Bloomfield was trying to do, and it's very much a case of you need to give a manager time. You need to give a manager time, because I actually had an exclusive chat with Rob Couhig last week, and I said to him, when Gareth Ainsworth left and you got in Matt Bloomfield, what was the reasoning behind it? It happened all so quickly, so I'm guessing you had a plan in place. And he said, I don't, and you probably know as well, Rob Couhig does not hold back. He doesn't care who's listening, who's around. He will say what he wants. And what he said about QPR, from a journalistic point of view, was gold, because I can tell you right now, not many owners would say what he said. But he said, I don't understand why owners of football clubs fire a manager or let go of a manager without having a plan of who to bring in. So they would have known that Matt Bloomfield was going to be the next manager of Wycombe Wanderers even before Gareth Ainsworth had left. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, even though things aren't going well right now, why would it make sense for us to fire him without us knowing who we can get in next? And they stuck by him. They gave him what he wanted. And I saw with my own eyes, Gab, how Wycombe were playing under his leadership. And I can tell you, Wycombe are on something. They are on something good. They just need time. They need patience. And ultimately, you make your own luck. That's what you do. Wycombe were very unfortunate last season with some of the injuries. I mean, losing Brandon Hanlon and Luke Leahy in the same game to horrific injuries.
Freddie Potts was the huge one for me.
Oh, yeah, but of course. And Freddie Potts. Freddie Potts getting injured away at Bradford in the Cup pretty much derailed Wycombe's winter, because after he got injured, it was no surprise Wycombe went on that run.
Mhm.
And the day he came back, it was the 0-0 draw against Leyton Orient. The following game, he came back like properly, and Wycombe won. They beat Bristol Rovers 3-2. So he was, without doubt, Wycombe's best player last season. So him getting injured was a huge blow. But then Brandon Hanlon, Luke Leahy, Ryan Tafazoli just couldn't stay fit for the majority of the season. There were just so many factors to it. Chris Farino, Dale Taylor, all these other players getting injured. So Wycombe had to make do with a makeshift squad, hence why they struggled. But that's why they're getting in the personnel that they want, primarily Premier League loans, to make sure they can get into the top six next season. And of all the teams in League One next season, it's going to be exciting, Gab. It really, really is.
Certainly is. I ask all my guests a reason for doubt. I'm going to throw one at you, which is, it's one thing saying that Rob and Pete Couhig's philosophy has been very much to stick by the manager, but it's Mikheil Lomtadze, who is the new owner, and Dan Rice, who is the new chairman. We don't know what Dan Rice or Lomtadze's approach is going to be if results do take a dip in form. Are they going to be more sort of short-termist about it? Is that a possible doubt for you?
I guess so. I personally wouldn't know what their mindset would be if Wycombe were to go. Let's just say, listen, hypothetically, if Wycombe start the season hypothetically and they lose 10 straight league games, so it gets to about start of October, Wycombe haven't gained a single point on the board, and they're, I don't know, let's say 12 points off safety, whatever, at that point of the season, then you've got to look at it from their perspective, think, what can we do to improve it? But they know the culture of the club isn't necessarily firing or sacking managers. They know that managers need to have time. Dan Rice has worked with many clubs prior to Wycombe. He was at Everton, he was at Arsenal, Fulham, Southampton. He also was part of part of England as well. He was a scout, and so he very much knows about nurturing. He also very much knows about it. It's going to take time for things to get what they want it to be. So there's always a possibility. Nothing's ever a guarantee in football, as you know. Like, nothing is ever for sure. So if Wycombe were to go on like even a worse run they went on last season, of course they're going to be having difficult discussions about what they do next. But it's no surprise that if you were to look at the recent history of Wycombe Wanderers, that the managers that they've had have been there for a relatively long period. When I mean long, I mean a year more, because in this day and age, you can get one team who can have 3 managers a season. So, and being a Birmingham fan, you know about that.
Is there anything though, James, that you would say, just because I asked this to all my guests, is there anything that you sort of feel a bit apprehensive about going into the new season? If you have to say one thing.
If I had to say one thing I'm apprehensive about, I would say when things hit the fan, obviously, I guess in most fan bases, it can get a bit toxic. That's the only thing I can say. I saw that last season when Wycombe went on that really poor run of form during the winter months, and I can see how volatile some of the fan base was turning. And obviously, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I'm not saying that everyone is allowed to say what they want. Everyone's allowed to think what they want. So I've got no questions with that. So I've got no problems with it. But it was how volatile and how aggressive people were getting with each other, and I witnessed it firsthand. It was quite a sight to see. And I remember after the Leyton Orient game, which I've already mentioned a few times, there were calls from some of the fans to sack Bloomfield. And this is a man who has pretty much dedicated his entire adult life to Wycombe Wanderers. He joined in 2003, left in 2022, returned in 2023, and he's got no plans of leaving anytime soon. His nickname is literally Mr. Wycombe. Mm-hmm. So when fans were screaming and giving him abuse, don't get me wrong, no one is immune from criticism.
Of course.
Everyone should be criticised at some point. But seeing that level of toxicity first, and that was pretty bad. And I remember it was after the EFL Trophy game against West Ham which Gideon Kadua scored in for West Ham, and Wycombe signed him about 48 hours later. That after that game, Matt Bloomfield spoke to myself and another journalist, and off the record, he just went, I really appreciate how you have been with me because it's been very difficult. And he was very open. He was really, really open. He shook our hands. He said, you've been firm, but you've been fair.
Yeah.
And
I think that's all a manager can ask for. I think most managers are probably going to be happy to accept criticism in certain places, but no, I think it's every credit to you, like, not to go overboard on it, and sort of because as much as I think football is an emotive sport and people do have their opinions, and that's part of the game. I think it's really important for people in positions of influence to actually have that sense of balance. So yeah, fair play to you.
Oh, thank you. And it doesn't actually help, because you don't want to add more fuel to the fire. You're just basically saying what has been said, but at the same time, you can't ignore what the fans have to say, because ultimately the fans are the most important people, because they're the ones paying their money to the club to watch their team play. So it's a balancing act. So to answer your question, the one thing I'll be apprehensive of is that when things don't go the way that you're hoping to go, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. It can get a bit hostile, but I think that's with most clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't a specific thing to Wycombe. I think it just exists everywhere in football nowadays. But I think most fans are pretty level-headed. So give me a too early for a prediction, obviously, James, but give me a number between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism for next season.
10 being the absolute optimistic.
Most optimistic, yeah.
You probably have had this answer by most people. I'm going to go for a 7. And the reason why I'm going to go for a 7, because you need to have room for disappointment when those happen. Because if you go for a 10 and things don't go your way, then you're going to be feeling deflated. You need to have some gap to have disappointments, because there are going to be some next season, and as with any club.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you go. Listen, James, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate your insight. Everyone go follow James Richings at James_BFP. This has been the EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive on Wycombe Wanderers. Get yourself subscribed, drop your comments in, let me know what you think Wycombe are going to do for next season, and we'll see you again very soon.